Você está ouvindo o podcast Estudar Direito pelo Mundo. Neste podcast você aprenderá com Klaus como você pode alcançar o sonho de realizar seu mestrado em Direito fora do Brasil. Envie suas perguntas e depoimentos no Instagram @klauslau.
Hello, everybody. Boa tarde. We are here this afternoon in Brazil time talking with Joshua Alter. He is somebody who works at a U.S. law school and also is the author of the Beyond Non-JD blog. Super excited to learn more about his background and how does somebody get into this kind of career. So I'll let Josh introduce himself now. So thank you so much for listening, guys.
Thank you very much for having me. My name is Joshua Alter. I am the author of Beyond Non-JD, which is a blog that I wrote in order to help international students think about attending U.S. law schools. I also have some experience teaching in law schools in other countries, mostly in China, and also LLM in the United States. And I currently work at the University of Florida, Levin College of Law. Today, I'm here in my personal capacity. And so the views that I'm expressing are my views only and do not represent the University of Florida. But I'm really, really excited to talk about the things that I love, mostly helping international students choosing the right programs, even if it's not an LLM, it can be a JD.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. And for us to get started, I just would like to know, how did you get into this career? Because I'm sure it's not that usual. And there's not that many people that do what you do, right? Regarding helping out people from other countries to study, to do an LLM, or to study law school, even a JD in the US. So how did it all get started?
Sure, that's a question I get a lot because most people, maybe they graduate law school, they spend a few years practicing, and then maybe they decide they want to return to work in the law school that either they went to or a different one. Whereas for me, I graduated law school and started teaching legal writing and started working in a law school the month after I finished graduation. And so I was actually looking to do international criminal law. I got a great internship in the Netherlands at the Yugoslavia War Crimes Tribunal during my 2L summer. And it was something that I was really seriously thinking about for after graduation. When I got back to my JD school, the first day I was back in the hallway, a professor asked me if I would be a teaching assistant for a brand new LLM program. And so as a third year JD student, what we call a 3L, I got to run the tutorials for LLM legal writing. And I loved it so much, I felt like I was doing more work on LLM help than I was doing on my own 3L subjects. And at the end of my 3L, the professors asked me if I would be willing to return after I graduated. And so my entire career has been working with international students, first in student support, then in teaching legal writing and other courses, and then in global engagement. So American law schools work a lot with law schools in other countries. And so I started doing that for a few years. And then in 2019, I moved over to the University of Florida, where I work with, in addition to international students, a very large tax LLM program, which is mostly American JD students. So I've had a great experience in New York City, in Shanghai, and now in Florida, working with a lot of different students and trying to support them. And so I generally tell people it might be better to start your career working as a lawyer for a few years and then come back. But I love the way my career has turned out.
Fantastic. I love how unprevisible this kind of thing can be. So it's just fantastic. It's definitely not the traditional just career path, and that's just wonderful. Once again, thank you so much for your willingness to be speaking here about your experience with JD and LLM students, especially those who come from abroad. As we spoke previously, I mentioned a little bit about like the purpose of the podcast and, just helping people to understand kind of some different aspects about, from applications all the way to working afterwards and, bar, everything. There's just so much to this entire world of LLM programs and, non-JD programs. So it's really nice to have somebody with such a great experience as you speaking here today. And for us to get started, you mentioned a lot about being working for quite a while. It's been a while. You're working with these international students and everything. Just out of curiosity, did you start law school right after you graduated from your bachelor's, or how did that work for you?
Sure. So, like a lot of American undergraduate students, I knew that law was something I probably wanted to do. So, I focused on a pre-law type subject. As you know, and your viewers probably know, law is not a bachelor subject here the same way as in Brazil. And so, I did political science. What in University of Maryland, it's called government politics. And I really had an eye on law school throughout. And so, I took one gap year after college. And then I decided to enroll in law school in 2010.
Alrighty, fantastic. Well, for those listeners who are just thinking about going to law school and having these different possibilities, maybe especially for those who live outside of the U.S., those in Brazil who are doing an LLB right now. What would you say are some things that are important to know about, and not maybe for the application itself, but maybe just to be aware of when you are considering eventually applying to a program abroad?
Sure. So I want to highlight two major big picture points. The first is that even though it seems like foreign law student LLM, every student I speak to, I try to tease out what their goals are because there are many international JD students. It's a very popular route and it's growing in popularity. And your goals will actually determine whether a JD or an LLM is the appropriate degree for you. My goal is that every student that I work with is in the right program for what they need. And so I get to work with international JD students, I get to work with international LLM students, and it's really, really a lot of fun. Things that I like to focus on are mostly career goals, right? Experience levels, financial situations to determine which programs will be the best for you. Not which law schools, but which degree. The second is that law schools will be here in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10 years. And so a lot of people, there's a rush for the LLM to get it as soon as possible. And if that goal is for a specific reason, let's say you have a job lined up in Sao Paulo or in Rio, and you want the credential, you want the bar exam, and you want to go back, then it might really be in your interest to go immediately after you finish your bachelor degree. But the other thing I want to caution people is if you can get 2, 3, 5 years of professional experience at one of those big firms. My Portuguese pronunciation is terrible, but like Matos Filho or a firm like that, you can put yourself in a more competitive environment for the schools that you're applying to if your goal is an LLM. You can also figure out a specialty. So maybe you're really, really interested in tax law, and then you can apply to some of those tax LLM programs or IP or environmental law or corporate and securities. And so again, if it makes sense for you to pursue an LLM immediately after finishing your bachelor degree, that's one option. But I don't want people to think that everyone has to do that. In fact, at UF, where I work, most of the LLM students come as licensed attorneys with experience from outside of the United States, which plays into the classroom, the dynamic is really wonderful. And so I think in a lot of situations, it's better to get a little bit of experience first, even if it's 1 or 2 years.
That's great. I also remember that recently on your blog, you mentioned about LOM to JD transfers. So apparently that's something that you can do as well, right? And I really like how you are committed to helping people to know for sure which degree they want to once they start. But it's also very interesting that you do have options in case you kind of change your mind, or maybe your goals weren't, I guess, as aligned in the beginning. Would you be able to comment a little bit about that article you wrote?
Sure. And so this is one of those areas where you're not going to be able to find one piece of information that will compare all of the programs. So some schools have LLM JD transfer, some schools do not. And so what it's important is if you are considering a JD, to decide whether it makes sense to take the LSAT or the GRE at some schools and apply directly, or if it would make sense to apply for an LLM and then to see about JD transfer options if your goals shift during the course of your study. There's also 2-year JDs for foreign lawyers at some schools called advanced JDs. And so there's a lot of information, but mostly this will be on each school's website. So the same way that all of the JD programs, you can find out about employment or bar passage or what we call the 509s on the ABA required disclosures, there's no neat little comparison that I've been able to find of the different programs. But an LLM to JD transfer is something that I recommend to your readers to check out that blog piece that I wrote, because there's no right answer or wrong answer. There's a lot of factors at play to determine whether or not going to an LLM program, thinking you might want to transfer, is a good idea. And so I would say every law school has a website. If you type in the name of the law school and the word LLM, it should get you somewhere. And that's the other big thing, is you can reach out to any law school you want. Every law school that I know of has somebody like me whose job it is to answer questions from around the world. And so we're happy to do that. It's part of our job duties or job description. And so if you do have questions, you're of course always welcome to reach out to the schools that have them. You can Google name of the law school, LLM to JD transfer, to see if they have a page for it. And I think I listed one of the schools that I'm familiar with out in California on the blog.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. That's very helpful. And I also wanted to recommend everybody to take a look at the Beyond Known JD blog, because there's a lot of valuable information there, especially if you're thinking about applying, if you're thinking about this could be a good option or not for you. So definitely check out the blog. Also do follow Joshua on LinkedIn. He always shares lots of valuable information. And if you're deciding, if you're thinking about it, it's definitely this kind of key people you need to be following, because they will be able to help you out a lot. And just saying again, definitely reach out. The schools are there to help, and they definitely want to have the students. So go ahead, speak with the people who work there. They will be able to provide you with the information you might need.
And that's a good example that I wanted to bring up, is the schools have realized that we can't just wait for the students to come to us. And so there's really 2 big groups that I wanted Brazilian bachelor students to know about. The first is Education USA is a wonderful resource. They are committed to bringing students from around the world to the United States. They run a special LLM fair in South America every year. I got to visit in Colombia one year at my last job. It was wonderful, but they went to Rio, they went to Sao Paulo, they went to Curitiba, and they went to Brasilia, I think, the year before the pandemic. They're still doing a lot of LLM recruitment. There's 30 or 40 schools, I think, that participate, maybe more. I am not part of that, but I do want you to know Education USA can be a great place to meet a lot of law schools in one sitting. It might be virtual this year. The other is what are called consortiums. And so some of my colleagues at some of the schools that I work with have kind of formed groups where you can meet 7 or 10 or 15 schools in one sitting. And so it can take a lot of time and energy and effort to find out information. And so for the Brazilian listeners, I would say look to the Education USA LLM tour and look to the consortium groups that are doing these public outreach, so you can learn about things like employment, bar exams, internships, courses, alumni networks, and all of the things that will be really, really helpful for you. I think information is the best thing to have as you make these decisions. And so I can't stress enough, rather than trying to have 20 one-hour meetings with 20 law schools, if you can get the information from a 1.5 hour or 2-hour event, that will just be a better use of your time.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, if I may go on, I guess not as a personal note, but just as a personal opinion of yours, just like everything in this podcast, of course, I was thinking, what would you say are the main things that people need to be thinking of if they want to apply it? And what I really want to ask is an LLM for every single one, every single person who wants to pursue a career in law? Is an LLM for everybody?
Sure. And so that really gets into a question of what your goals are. A lot of hiring in the United States is done through what's called OCI, on-campus interviews. And traditionally, after you finish your first year of your JD, at a lot of schools, the law firms will come onto campus and interview the students for the second summer for a temporary position. We call it summer associate position. And then if they like them, they tend to give them the offer to return after they graduate. So if you wanted to work in a large law firm, that is generally a good track. For other positions, a lot of it is about experience, doing the clinics, doing the externships, doing the internships, the networking, the summers. And so for those, an LLM might be a little bit short. And so if you are going to do an LLM, but your goals are to work in the United States, you want to see what is your advantage, what is your value add. Are you in a very demand area, like maybe tax or patent law? Do you have experience where the law firms or the companies are going to be bringing you in as an experienced hire instead of an entry-level hire? Are your language skills such that a firm will see you as a valuable addition over a JD student? And so an LLM can be for a lot of people, but I think for some people, it goes back to that first point. Does the LLM make the most sense for you? If it does, great. There's a lot of great programs. There's a lot of great resources. There are a lot of very happy people that complete LLMs. But if your goals don't align with an LLM, or they don't align with an LLM very well, then you have to really consider, do I want to change my goals, or do I want to change my degree?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. I do see a lot of people who want to have an international experience, but maybe, as you mentioned, it really depends on your goals. You can have an international experience with other kinds of programs, even shorter ones that maybe you can do through the summer or maybe in the end of the year. So great insight about, just looking at your goals and what you want to get out of the LLM experience, right?
Right. And so another great example is the blog that I just did today about the exchanges, the bilateral partnerships. I think that was yesterday. Is a lot of very famous schools around the world have these partnerships where you can spend a semester studying in a US law school or a US undergraduate. And so if you do want to get immersion in US legal system, in the American culture, there are great opportunities for that. There are summer courses, there are winter courses, there are virtual exchanges now that I'm seeing starting to prop up. And so you have a lot of great options. And again, I don't like to keep saying it, but the goals determine the decision, not the decision determining the goals, if that makes sense.
Would you say that most students you get to have the chance to mentor, to be in touch with, do most of them go back to their home country as soon as their LLM ends? Do they go through the OPT entirely? Do you know, like, do you have an idea? Maybe not necessarily like statistics, but is it a big amount that actually goes and sit for the bar and maybe even go and work into a US law firm after the OPT, with a sponsoring visa and everything?
Sure. So it varies student to student, school to school. So it would be hard to give a broad overview. But one of the reasons I've really loved working at the University of Florida is through our tax program. A lot of the international tax lawyers will get positions in large accounting firms after they graduate. And so that will be for the OPT year. And then for a lot of them, after the OPT to remain in the United States. But I also have students who have no desire to stay in the United States after they get the credential and the bar exam, or even just the credential. And so it's hard to really give kind of a general overview because there are different kind of categories of students. I would say for the students who are mostly interested in working in the United States after graduation, they're going to have a little bit of a calculation that's different than those who just want to do an OPT to get some experience to return home versus those who don't want to do an OPT. They want to get in and get out from the program. And so when you figure out what your goals are, you can start speaking to the schools that are of interest to you about whether your goals would be a good fit with their degree programs.
Well, maybe if we could have some piece of advice, maybe once you are into an LLM program, what are some things you should be doing from the beginning of your studies to make sure you get the best experience out of it? So do you have some ideas maybe for networking and everything else? Maybe start already with the end in mind and thinking about OPT from the beginning. What are some of the things you have to share?
Sure. So one, obviously you're big on LinkedIn. I'm sure a couple of your followers are as well, is you can look at your bachelor in law school in Brazil and you can search the school page by alumni. You can see which alumni are in the United States. You can see which alumni are in the city that you're in. And so I think that that can be a nice way to connect with the Brazilian community from your bachelor network in the United States. It's also good to network with the larger Brazilian network in the United States. There are a lot of Brazilian attorneys who have done JD and LLM programs who would be happy to work with you or to know you. There are also networks within your school that have nothing to do with Brazil in the type of work you want to do, the market you want to be in. And so these informational interviews, I think, are a really good thing to start early. Obviously professional, courteous of people's time, and really being inquisitive about their background, what got them to where they are. Obviously for me, if somebody will reach out like you and say, I read your articles, I read your LinkedIn, it would be great to chat, I'm always happy to do that. Luckily, I'm not that popular, so I don't get too many people reaching out. But for me, I like to be able to help other people. And so I would say on the networking side, you want to make sure you're not starting off with, hey, I never met you, can I have a job? It's more about getting to know their path and their journey and being able to keep up to date with them. You don't want to view networking as a one-off. You want to view it as building a relationship. The other is if you're doing an LLM program, depending on which school you're at, you might be in a lot of courses with just the LLM students. And so it might feel a little bit more difficult in order to kind of connect with the larger JD community. And that's why for our general LLM students, what I call the LLM in US law, I ask each of them in the fall semester to take at least one class with the JD 1Ls. This way they're going to be in civil procedure, contracts, property, one course with new students, people who are new to Florida, people who might not have any friends yet, people who are just as nervous as they are, or maybe a little bit more nervous. And so I don't want, you've probably seen me say this, but I don't want students to feel like they're the international students at my school. I want them to feel like every other student, JD or LLM, where they are a valuable member of the community. And so for a Brazilian, figure out who is either Portuguese speaking, they learned Portuguese in high school or college, to be able to build those connections with. And so we have a language corner, we have ways to connect our JD students to our LLM students. But because we have a smaller international group, it's a little bit easier because there's not as many of them. So they can kind of immerse themselves in a deeper way. The other thing is to join a group that has nothing to do with Latin America or Brazil in an area you like. And so if you love intellectual property law, join your school's IP society. You're going to get speakers. They'll have free lunch, at least they did before the pandemic at a lot of schools. And then you get to meet the JD students who are 1Ls, 2Ls, and 3Ls who want to go into the same areas as you. And then the third thing that I think is good is to reach out to the alumni office, which is different than the career office in most schools, to see which alumni from Brazil they have that they might want to introduce you to. And that if there's any events that you can volunteer at, to maybe check people in or to be able to assist with, because the alumni of the school are a very, very good source of networking and getting jobs. And so if you can find a way to kind of get invited to one of these events, you're able to meet alumni who might think it's the coolest thing in the world that a Brazilian lawyer is at their school. They might tell you about the work that they do cross borders in a Latin America practice with a law firm in Sao Paulo, or they might tell you how they studied abroad in Rio when they were in undergraduate. And so figuring out these informal networks while still focusing on your academics, I think is a really, really valuable part of the experience for an international student.
Fantastic tips. I hope that you guys are taking the advantage of it and maybe even writing notes. Those are just really, really good. Thank you so much, Joshua. Well, considering all of these tips, I was thinking, do you have any, uh, just the general piece of advice you'd give to somebody who's maybe thinking whether they want to do, an LLM or a JD? You did mention very clearly that it really depends on your goals, but is there like this one kind of deal breaker of deciding whether this is a degree for you or like this is definitely not for you?
Nah, in English, we use the phrase soul searching. And so what I tell students who are reaching out to me is to speak to the partners or the head lawyers in the offices or companies or law firms that they admire most in their home countries. So in Rio, in Sao Paulo, in Belo, and to ask their advice for the types of work that you want to do, whether it makes sense to study abroad, whether it makes sense if you're studying abroad to go to America or a different country, the types of programs to go into, and you start building up that network of people in Brazil, especially people who have already studied abroad, because even if they returned home, they have friends who stayed in the countries. And so figuring out from people who know what to look for, people who know your home market and the American or British or Canadian markets can be really, really helpful as you're deciding whether or not this is a good decision for you. And so I would say what I tell our students is don't just rely on our alumni network. You were all very smart, well-credentialed people before you got here. Speak to the people who you worked with, who you worked for, who you did internships for, who taught you, to also get their advice. And they can also connect you with people in the United States who can give you great advice as well.
Fantastic. I don't even have words to express, thank you so much once again for all of your time and willingness to share this information with us. It's definitely something very, very nice, and that we need somebody to be just giving us this advice that we can't find anywhere else. So other than going into the university's websites and also getting to read your posts on Beyond Non-JD and LinkedIn, do you have any other suggestions where people should be looking for information when they are doing this quest?
Sure, it can be a little bit hard because the information is fragmented, but I think you've seen one of my good friends. He used to be the person I worked next to in my last job, Stephen Horowitz. He's now the director of online legal English at Georgetown. I would say take a look at his podcast, The Law and Language, which I did an interview for. Another colleague that I used to work with, Daniel Edelson, is in charge of US Law Essentials, and they have a lot of great resources. And then start to see what is available because of the virtual world with COVID. Things that used to have to be in person, meetings, conferences, events, are now hybrid. There might be good discounts, or it might even be free to attend, where you can get all of this knowledge, not just on whether you should apply to law schools, but on substantive law, maybe like a Latin America tax conference that's now virtual, where you're getting this education from your home country and even from your home, not even at the university. The other thing that I suggest is, obviously, some law schools in Brazil are considered more internationalized than others. Some of them might have dual degree programs, some might have exchanges, but if you would like to see an exchange at your university, to reach out to your international office at your university in Brazil to see what sorts of connections they're able to build with universities in America, in Europe, and anywhere else in the world. I think what we are seeing is, in addition to these bilateral agreements, what we call partner schools, we're going to start seeing more groupings, trilateral relationships where it's kind of a consortium. And so the world is a very, very big place. I've been able to live in Australia, Israel, Netherlands, China, and obviously America, been able to travel all over the world. And I think it's great to have all of this mobility both ways, inbound and outbound.
Well, for us to finish up today's episode, Joshua, would you have any final words to share with the listeners?
Sure. You can always reach out to the law schools you want to consider to see what sorts of webinars or activities they're hosting. They'll have a lot of great information that they'll be able to share with you. Obviously, with Zoom, it's a lot easier than flying over to Rio or Sao Paulo, even though we do miss that part of it. But there's just so many great opportunities where you just have to know that they exist. And so for your listeners, if you do want to study in a US law school, there is a lot of information that's publicly available. If you Google ABA required disclosures, that will be a lot about the JD programs. But for the LLM programs, you're just going to have to work a little bit harder. So I would say go to the events that are being hosted, get the information, which will be really, really helpful as you when you do decide to do study in the United States. And then to really view this as a great experience that is going to help you with the rest of your life. And so in a perfect world, you form these deep connections with your classmates from around the world, with your American classmates, so that 5, 10, 15 years later, when their company or their law firm is doing a deal in Brazil, they pick up the phone and say, hey, it's Josh from class. We're going to set up a deal. I wanted to get your advice. Do you have time to chat? Or is this something your firm does? And so thinking about the network of the school that you're attending, I think it's not just a one-year program. It's the rest of your life. You can benefit year after year from being part of these networks, by being a part of these groupings. And so it's hard because they're going to tell you wherever you go to work hard, to study, to read the cases, to brief the cases, to outline, to form study groups. And so for some people, they view it as, I don't have time for that, but you think about how to balance those for 1 year versus the rest of your life. And then for other people, the work you can be doing when you're preparing to go can be even more valuable than the work that you do when you get there. And so that's why you've probably seen my pre-LLM, my Legal English for American Law Schools, is the higher your English comprehension level, the more your understanding of the US legal system, the more you've kind of intentionally thought about these types of things from your home country, the better position you're going to be in when you arrive. Maybe you can become a teaching assistant or a research assistant for a professor. Maybe you're going to be able to organize a conference or a symposium. Maybe you're going to be able to kind of give feedback in class. And so again, especially when you're preparing to go for an LLM, you're thinking about moving, you're thinking about the conversion rate for currency, you're thinking about finding an apartment. There's so much going on, but if you can view the year before you're going as an investment in the LLM or the JD, I think doing a little bit more on the legal English side can be really helpful.
Well, just wanted to thank you once again for joining us and for being willing to share your time. And really, you're always very welcome to share. Whenever you're having events or anything, you're welcome to share them with us. We'll love to distribute it over the network. And once again, thank you so much for joining us today at Estudar Direito pelo Mundo. And I hope you keep in touch.
Perfect. And Brazil was actually the first country I visited in my new job. I got to go to Sao Paulo, Campinas, and Curitiba, and I definitely hope to get back sometime soon. So, muito obrigado.